Begin the current Daf, Mesechta Bava Metzia Daf Zayin. Begin 7 lines down at the top of the Amud, where the Gemara continues with the theme of these first two prakim of an Aveda, specifically regarding the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. How do we return a lost object, which is basically the sugya of simonim, of bringing an identifying feature to prove that it's yours. Today's Daf should be a chus v'chim so that's throughout the entire world, and every time a freilich and shishim pliyah. So discussing today's daf are shiur. It says in the pasuk that the source of the halacha of Hashavas Aveda, it mentions different items, and the Gemara goes through why does it mention them. Shiur is to teach you that even for the shearings of its tail, something insignificant, but like what you cut off from the hair. Chamar is to tell you that even if it's not a siman in the donkey itself, even if it's just a siman in the saddle, similar clothing is to say that it has a siman and it has claimants, because generally a garment is something that's made; it's not a natural thing. Some of the other ideas in the today's daf is aveda shem pruta. If it doesn't have a pruta's worth, then you're patur. You don't have to do Hashavas Aveda. And then the big question is Saman Deraisa Drabanan, is a sign biblical or is it a rabbinic halacha? What's the nafkamina? Now, do they get Isha b'Simonim? Get Isha is a biblical halacha. Can you give back a woman's get with Simonim? Also, regarding Midna Lashuma, do we testify regarding a dead person to say that the woman could get remarried on something like a birthmark? To say, would that be an identifying feature to allow the woman to get remarried? So begin the current Daf Zayin, begin 7 lines down at the top of the Yamid, where we discussed the halacha of Hashavas Aveda. So it says in the pasuk, you shouldn't see the ox of your brother or his sheep that's rejected. And you should do it for his donkey, and listen, lost it to his garment. All lost items you have an obligation to return to him. So the Mishnah starts off on that premise of this pasuk. That is, the Gemara is going to explain exactly what it is referring to, but the garment was included in all these different items. So, so why was it specifically mentioned in the pasuk? And also you should do for his garment. Says the Mishnah, we wanted to make a hekesh to compare all Avedas to the simla. To tell you, it's just like a garment is distinct because generally a garment would have an identifying feature. This is someone's individual garment. And as Rashi explains, every garment has an owner that claims it because it's not a natural thing, it's a man-made thing, it didn't come from Hefker. So you're going to have someone that owns it, that has a claim. Av kol davar, so too, everything has two criteria. Shesh b'simonim. It has identifying features like a garment, and that has claimants like a garment. You would have to go ahead and announce it, which when you say somebody has a claimant is coming to exclude something that you know the guy was miyayish. If you know he gave a pob, says Rashi that's excluding that there's no teveya, there's no one that's claiming it. But in general, if it has a siman and it has a teveya, that's something that you have a chiyuv of Hashavas Aveda. Now the Gemara asks, just a clarification question. What was it that you were saying that the simla, the garment, was included in all this, and then you specifically mentioned it? Some Rabbi says b'chlal, meaning we mean including the pasuk. It says it says all the lost objects of your brother. So why do you have to say a specific aveda of simla to tell you that it has to have those two criterion of siman and a teveya? Now, a related discussion. Once we're mentioning the pasuk, Amar Rabbi says, well, there's other items mentioned in the pasuk too. Why is it mentioned ox? Why is it mentioned chamar, donkey, an isle? Why is it mentioned seh, a lamb, and a simla, and garment? So why does it mention all these items? Just say aved sechicha. Why have to mention these specifics? It says Gemara tzricha, no, it's necessary, and the Gemara is going to go through and explain why each one was necessary. Because one is simla, as we said in the Mishnah, but only said the garment. I mean, I would have said hanamila be'edim de gufa. When did we say that you return the lost object? When you have witnesses in the item itself. In the jacket has a tear on the bottom of a siman de gufa. It says witnesses that it's yours, or at least identifying feature in the body of a chamar. But let's say a donkey be'edim de ukuf. Let's say you have witnesses that the saddle is yours, of a siman de ukuf, or identifying features on the saddle. Oh, regarding that, that's what we if you don't have a simon in the donkey, but you have a simon in the saddle, I would say that you wouldn't be able to return it. That's why the Torah writes a donkey, extra pasuk to make a drasha. I feel like that even a donkey, even if you have identifying features in the saddle, that itself is going to give you the whole donkey because look, that's my saddle, but that's not in the donkey itself. That's the chiddush. Now, says the Gemara, okay, Shoiber said the Kasvach one lamali. Why do you need to talk about the ox and the sheep? Says the Gemara, Shoiber is teaching you that fil legizas novai, that even there's some hair at the edge of the tail of an ox, even that we're saying is what you would give back to the one who owns it. Which Taisus asks in different Masal Legizas Novai says, well, I don't know what you're saying. If it's a Shavat Pruta, obviously. If it's not a Shavat Pruta, so then we exclude later on from that there's no Chiva Shava, Shavat Pruta. What's the Chiddush in the little amount of hair from the tail of the ox? So Taisus, no, you need it that there's a Chiv right now for you to be geizes to shear the wool, to cut off the wool, that little hair, even though it's not a Shavat Pruta. If it's a time when usually the owner would do it, so that says Taisus the Chiddush of this case, that you have to cut it off. And then when the owner comes to cleanse, you have to give him even those little hairs that's from the tail, if it's worth a Shavat Pruta. Now, what's the seh? What's the purpose of the sheep? Is ligizaisav, is for like the sheep's wool, that the shearings of the wool you have to return. So I don't understand. When a shirt, just say ox, the filigiz is nava, that even you tell me this little amount of hair of the tail of the ox, koshkin sell ligizaisav, the shore, a sheep for its all the wool that's on it, that definitely would be included from the case of shor. So the Gemara says you're right. Ella, it's a difficulty. Amar Rava says 2 times that, which Tais clarifies, there are more times that we have such a question, but it's specifically regarding behemoths. Chamor debar l'Reb Yehuda, which is not this case in our Gemara. In the halachas of Baba Kama, Rabbi Yehuda holds that you're chayiv on the damages of kalim in a bar. So you can't darshan bar chamor v'loy kalim. I mean, generally we say when it says in the Torah that if something falls into a bar yechayiv, it says shiur or chamor, and what's the purpose of saying chamor? According to Rabbi Yehuda, that the word chamor is difficult, and v'sed aveda, which is what we're discussing over here. When it talks about in the pasuk b'shavas aveda, when it says all these different items of leisira esher chicha yiseyoy v'chintas lechamor v'chintas l'zimlosi, the word seh, the divrei kol, according to everyone, kasha is difficult. What's it coming to teach us? Because in contrast to the case of bar, the Rabbanan hold shor b'le adam chamor b'le kelim. Chamor is necessary to teach you that you're not chayim kelim. Who told you are chayim kelim? So what's chamor coming to teach us? It's shver, it's difficult. What does it teach us? And our pasuk over here of seh is also difficult because it's not really teaching us. It's already included in shor. So that's a question. But now the Gemara says, why is this such a question? Be'ema, why don't you just say l'glol mudasa? Why don't you say that when the animal relieves itself, that actually is fertilizer, actually has value, that you have to return the glolim? Because if I would have said shor, I would have said, yeah, shor is coming to teach you the little hairs from the tail. But glolim, the animal dung, is not significant. You wouldn't have to return it. That's what the pasuk says, another word seh, to include glolim. Maybe that's what's coming to teach us. So no. Glolim, animal dung, afkudi mafkalu. A person makes it ownerless for whoever puts in the effort to be busy with it. And therefore the pasuk cannot be coming to include it, because that's something that ain't like taivin. We said it has to be similar to similar. It has to have simanim and taivin, and no one's coming to claim what the animal zchgemacht, that to go and say, hey, return that to me, that's not going to be included. Then the Gemara has a different question. Maybe vidilma, maybe seh, is l'simanim hudasa. Maybe it's coming to teach us that you return an item, even though there's no item that it's yours, just that you have a simon. I could give a simon that it's mine, because the bailon is actually a question the Gemara asks later on. Simanim deiraisa derabanim. Is the halacha that if someone gives an identifying feature that you return it, is that a biblical or rabbinic? Now, the Gemara ultimately wants to try to bring a raya from our Mishnah, where we learn that from Simla, because Simla, you told me something that has simanim and taivin, and the Gemara rejects and says, not true, you're right. The main thing that the Tana wants to learn out from Simla is that there's Toivin. Simonim was what's called Kedinis, but it's just parenthetically said it together, but it's not really learned out from Simla. So that says the Gemara. So wait a second, Givaldig. Why don't you say that that's what the extra word says coming to teach you for the halach of Simonim? The Philip is Simonim, Adrinan. That's why the extra word to say that even if you have just a sign, you return it. Simonim Deiraisa, and then you'll know Simonim is biblical. Why don't you say that's what the word says coming to teach? I mean, they said no. From the fact that the Tana in our Mishnah, when did it mention Lisimanim? It mentioned it Gabi Simla, together with the halacha of that there has to be a tevei, has to be someone who's claiming. Because the Tana in the Mishnah, says, oh, what's distinct about a Simla? Shesh b'Simonim, yesh l'tevin. It's identifying features as a claimant. So although we're going to end up saying that maybe that's just parenthetical, it's not really, we'll learn that from Simla, but that's where it's being said in the Mishnah. That's where Chayv L'Hachas, you have to announce it. So to anything that has a sign, it has a claimant, you have to announce it. Oh, Shema Minah, obviously the Selav Simonim Hu Da'asa. Obviously the word says not come and teach Allah of someone like Rashi explains. Meaning it was obvious to the Tana of the Mishnah that the word says teaching you something else. We just don't know what. Meaning it's a good question, but you could prove from the Tana that he obviously didn't say that's where you know Simonim from, because then when you're mentioning Simla, you weren't parenthetical or mention Simonim over there. That's why it's obvious that we didn't answer it from Simonim of Seh. So we don't know. So what is Seh coming to teach us? Meaning the Tana obviously, it's a good question, but the Tana obviously didn't hold like that. That's why it's mentioning Simonim by Simla. Questions. So what is Seh? We don't know, but the Tana obviously knew what it's coming to teach us. Now the Gemara continues, how much is the value of an item to obligate you to do Hashavas Aveda? Still in the Brisa, it says in the Pasuk that this is what you should do for his donkey, his clothing. This is what you should do for all the lost objects of your brother, Asher Toivad, which is lost from him, meaning that it should be called an Aveda. What do you mean it should be called a lost item? That excludes if the lost item doesn't have a value of prut, it's not considered lost from someone when it has no value. So it has to have at least a shava pruta, which Tais actually says, what do you mean? Anytime mumminess is only shava pruta. He says, no. You would have thought, the Baram Tais says, you would have learned that from Kalabay Desachicha, so you need a special meat to say, not everything he loses. It has to be something that's considered a loss from him, which has a value of a pruta. Rabbi Yehuda, he says, from the word umitzasa, that and you find it, has to be something it's a find. Excludes if a lost item does not have a value of a pruta, because it's not considered that you found anything. So the Gemara says, my benayu. What exactly is the difference between these two different opinions? Aren't they both saying the same thing? One saying on the word lost, one saying the word found. That has to have a shava pruta, but it's the same thing. So the Gemara has two answers. Amabai says, the difference between them is how to understand which word is it that we're going to darshan. You're right, the same halacha, but they're learning it from different words, which is mar nafkele masher toivet. One learns out from the word asher toivet. Mar nafkele mitzasa. Other one learns out from the word mitzasa. But now the Gemara says that ulamanda nafkele masher toivad. So if you learn from the word asher toivet, hayu mitzasa my overlay. What do you do with the word? And he finds it. Well, of course he's finding it. Oh, that has to be a valuable find. But you're learning it from asher toivad. So what do you learn from mitzasa? This is one of those Gemaras that go back and forth. You have to follow, which is because each one's learning it from somewhere else. Homi Baile look at Rabbanoi. He needs the word of mitzasa teach a different teaching of Rabbanoi. Then Rabbanoi says in mitzasa, it says in that you're going to find it. What does it mean that you find it? Find is not that you see it. It means that it means that came to your hand. That means you found something. So what do you need that for? So Rashi explains that, and it's coming to teach you. We know there's a drush that says that Hashavas Aved is only for a chicha, for your brother, not for a non-Jew. It's coming to teach you that a lost object of a non-Jew is permitted. Now, the chiddush the pasuk is teaching you is don't say when do we exclude a lost object of a non-Jew. It just means you don't have to put the effort to go and get it. But once it's in your hand, you have to return it. No, that's what it's saying. Mitzasa means it came to your hand, and still it's a chicha b'lev d'kachavim. That's what's teaching you. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the other one. Now, according to the one that learns out the halach of Shabbat Pruta from Mitzasa, Hay Asher Toivad my Ovid late. What does he do with Asher Toivad? Says Gemara Mebayle Rabbi Yechanan. He needs to teach halach Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan Mishum Ben Yochi. Minayin Lavei the Shashat Vanar Shimuteres. Where do we know that a lost object that the river flooded, that whoever finds it could keep it. It says in the pasuk, "Kain tasa l'chalaveda zechichu." When it's talking about that you have to return the lost object, it says, and so shall you do to all the lost items of your brother. Asher toivad mimenu mitzasa, that's lost from him, and you find it, which means mishabudehem meno. It's only if it's lost from your brother, but everyone else it's found by. Yatzazu, that excludes when the river floods it. Shabudim, and it's lost from him, and it's not found by anyone because the river flooded it. No one can get to it. So, since it says mimenu, which is the halach of the teaching from him and not from the whole world, so therefore, like Rashi explains, that's what it says Asher Toivad, but that's what Asher Toivad is coming to teach you. Asher Toivad mimenu. But the Gemara says Idach. Now going back to Rabbi Yehuda, Hadar Rabbanoi, this teaching of that even when it comes to your hand, you don't have to return it to the non-Jew. Minole, where does he know this from? He can't learn it out from Umitzasa, which is where the Rabbanoi teaching from, because he needs that to teach you the halacha of Shabbat Pruta. Says Gemara, Nafkele me Umitzasa. He learns of an extra vav. Umitzasa sounds like, and you already found it. Well, that would be the teaching of Rabbanoi, that even though it's already in your hand, you don't have to return to the non-Jew. Now the Gemara goes to the other word, V'idach the Tanakama, Had Rabbi Yechanan. The law of Rabbi Yechanan that when it's lost from everyone, it's going to be permitted. Minole, where does he know? He can't learn from Asher Tova Mimenu, because he uses Asher Tova to teach that has to have a value of a Shabbat Pruta that's considered a lost object. So you want to know Nafkele Mimenu, he learns out from the word Mimenu, because Asher Tova is one thing, it has to be a value of a Shabbat Pruta. And the extra word mimenu, the teaching it's only lost from him, but it's not lost from everyone else. It says, but Rabbi Yehuda would tell you mimenu lemashmalei, that just the word mimenu doesn't sound like anything. You need Asher Toivad mimenu, so he doesn't have Asher Toivad extra. He learns that umitzasa the halacha of a Shabbat Pruta. This is all one pshat of that. Really, there's no difference in halacha between the two opinions of Tanakh and Rabbi Yehuda. It's Mashma's darshan, but just we had to figure out what do they each do with the other one's pasuk, and how do they know their halachas that they learn from the other pasuk? Now the Rav Ami gives a different pshat, a little bit more sophisticated. He says, "Pruta shehuzla ikbeinayu." The difference between them is if at the time that it was lost, it was worth a Shabbat Pruta. Then the price of that chachkala went down. And by the time you found it, it was worth less than the Pruta. That's the difference between them, as the Gemara explains. The one that learns the Tanakama from the words that has to be considered a lost item. To Ikka, when it was lost, it was worth a Shabbat Pruta, we have to return it. Manda Mitzasa, Rabbi Yehuda learns that from Umitzasa, Laka, when you found it, you didn't find something worth a Shabbat Pruta. You would not have to return it. The Gemara doesn't like this because Ilamanda Masher Toivad, even the Tanakama learns out from Masher Toivad, Habi'ina Umitzasa, Balaka. Yes, it's saying that it's about the find, the lost object, but you also have to have the find. You didn't have a mitzasa because when you found it, it was worth less than the Shabbat Pruta. So the Gemara says, okay, Ella the other way. Pruta shehukrik b'nayru. The difference between them is that it only became a Pruta afterwards. The chachkala was worth a half a Pruta, and by the time you found it was worth a Pruta. So the Gemara explains. Mandam a mitzasa, the one who learns out Rabbi Yehuda from a mitzasa, Ikka. By the time you find it, it's worth a Shabbat Pruta. Mandam ashatayva, but the one who says that it has to be a lost item, Lekka, because when it was lost, it was worth less than the Pruta. So the Gemara says, yeah, but you have the same question. Mandam mitzasa, according to one who learns a mitzasa, although by the time you find it, it's a Mציעא. But you have to have that it was lost, and it wasn't a Pruta when it was lost. So how's that going to work? So the Gemara says, okay, and this is the final answer. Ela Pruta shehukra v'hozla v'chazav hokra. It was worth a Pruta. The price went down over that week that he lost it, and then went back up to be worth a Pruta when he found it. That's ikbina. That's the difference between them, as the Gemara explains. Mandam asher toiva, the one who says that we learn that from that it was lost, ikra. So you have asher toivad, it was a Pruta when it was lost, and you also have a mitzasa, which is not the primary source, but at least you have a mitzasa. It was a Mציעא when it was found. But a mandam mitzasa, the one who learns that primarily from that it has to be a Mציעא when you find it. He needs it to be the value of a Mציעא from when it was lost until when it was found, even in the middle, which it wasn't. Therefore, according to that Manda Amar, is what we're saying, that you wouldn't have to return it to the owner. Now, related to the halacha of the Mishnah that we already alluded to this question before, Iboyu led the following fundamental question. Simanim, this halacha that you return something with a guy giving identifying feature, is that the Raisa, the biblical halacha? Or the Rabban is only rabbinic? Says my nafkamina. What's the relevancy of that? Who cares? Either way, Chiva Shabbos Avedi with a simon. Says no, I'll tell you very importantly, Laduri get Isha to return the get of a woman. Let's say the shliach who was bringing it lost it before he gave it to her. Do you return it to him, the simanim with identifying features or not? As the Gemara explains. If you say it's a biblical halacha, okay, so then you would return it. But if you say it's only rabbinic, when the Rabbanan make this institution, which later on is going to explain what takana would this be. But if you say it's a takana Rabbanan, they made it b'mamayna, because even though biblically, let's say this money does not belong to this person, but the Rabbanan have a koyach, what's called hefker bezin hefker. When it comes to monetary law, they could say, even though it's yours, we're making it onulus, we're going to give it to this person, and we have a reason why we're doing this takana. Abisura, but regarding prohibitory law, regarding gerushin, love Rabban takanta, Rabban, they have no right to make a takana. They wouldn't uproot a halach of eshes ish to give it back to the wrong person. So that's the question: would you return the get isha or not? That depends if it's Rabbanan or their Reisa. What says Tashmat? Trying to bring a raya from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, "Afa simlo haisabachal kalelo." So the garment was included in the halacha of all the different avedis to return. Lama yatzis. Why did the Torah single out a garment? Says the Tana for 2 points. That to compare all the other avedis to a similar and to tell you like this. Mas simla miyuched is just like a garment is distinct, and the Torah writes it to tell you shesh l'simanim has identifying features, has this little tear on the side of the left lapel. V'yesh l'tayvin, and there's also claimants because the garment is not a man, it's a man-made thing. Chayav lahachas, you have to announce it. Av kol davar shesh l'simanim v'yesh l'tayvin l'chem lahachas. So it only has those two features, which is what do you learn from Simla? Has simanim and tayvin. So you see, simanim is a deraisa that we learn that from Simla. So the Gemara says no. The Gemara rejects the proof. It says Tana. The truth is tayvin etzuchlei. What he really wanted to learn out in the pasuk was teaching the halacha of a tayveya. It has to be someone that's a claimant. Meaning it's coming to exclude if the guy already gave up hope and there's mafkir that there's no tayveya. Simanim that the Tana mentions is kedinesva, was only mentioned parenthetical without the pasuk. It's just we're alluding to it on the pasuk, but really that's not what the word simla is teaching, and therefore that wouldn't be a proof. The Gemara says, okay, Tashma tried to bring another raya that we had mentioned in the Mishnah, in the Gemara on Amar Aleph, Chamar. We said, okay, why does it say Chamar in the pasuk too? We said to teach you bisimani ukaf, in the signs of the saddle, that even that works for the donkey. You see simanim works. So the Gemara says, no, aim to say be'edi ukaf. Doesn't really mean simanim. If you have witnesses that recognize with their eyes that saddle is yours, then they will turn not only the saddle but also the donkey. The Gemara says, okay, Tashma, let's try to bring another ayah from a pasuk in the Varm. It says that the lost item will be with you until your brother, the owner, asks for it. Now the question, what you think to entertain, you're going to give it to him before he seeks it? What does that mean? Ella, rather, the pasuk should be expounded like this. There's shehu. What's it mean? You investigate that guy who's coming to collect it, if he's a deceptive person or not. Now, says the Gemara, my love, how do you check him out? Isn't it b'simanim with signs? Let's say check him out. Oh yeah, tell me what size is it? Oh, tell me, in the inside there's a mark. What, so that's how you check him out. You don't just give it to him. But isn't that obviously the Torah is telling you, you check him out with simanim, so you see simanim deraisa, so you want to lie, be'edim, with witnesses. Let him bring witnesses that it's his, and then you return again. Still no proof. Doesn't mean with simanim, it could be with edim. So Gemara said, okay, let's Tashma try to bring another raya from a Mishnah Mesechtes Yabamis. Mishnah says, Ein me'idin. We don't testify on a dead person to allow his wife to get remarried. Allow parts of upon him, only on the figure of the face, imachaitim, with the nose. I mean, if they see his face with the nose, then we could be clear that this is the dead person. And meaning, even though that the people, the witnesses, saw signs on his body or on his garments, it's not going to help. you want the woman to be able to get remarried, the witness have to see his face with his nose. But one thing is shmamina, obviously simanim lab dairaisa. Because if simanim were dairaisa, then the simanim in the guf or in this kalim should allow the woman to get remarried. Obviously, it's not biblical. Somebody said no. Gufa, when we mentioned that the witness is saying signs in the body, it's just the arch v'gutz. Tall, short. That's not a simon because many people are tall and short. When we talk about K-love, the reason why simanim on his garments are not valid could be simanim is deraisa. So why wouldn't we allow the woman to get remarried? Because answer number one, says the Gemara, is because the chashin l'she'ela were concerned that maybe he lent his garments to someone else. And it's that other person that they see dead. It could be when it's a distinct simon, maybe it would be deraisa, maybe we would allow the woman to get remarried. No, anything that's an identifying feature is a simon. We're just saying that why we're not letting the woman get remarried when they say. Right, so that's what the Gemara is answering. It's saying because tall and short is not really such a strong simon, so therefore we can't let her get remarried. But maybe if it's a good, strong simon, maybe we would allow it to get married. So the Gemara answer number one by saying about the garments that we don't let her get remarried is because we said about the body, why that doesn't work, because that's just tall and short. And regarding garments, is answer number one is because we're concerned maybe he lent it to someone else. So that's why it's not really a valid simon. The Gemara says, wait a second. If we're concerned for lending, then why did you tell me chamor, a donkey, ukev, you give signs in the saddle? That you give back the donkey. How do you give it back? Maybe the guy lent his saddle. So he said, no. There's a ukev, a saddle. No one's lending out a saddle. It's going to injure the donkey. Meaning you have it tailored for this donkey. No one's taking on and off. And therefore, that's how you know you didn't lend it. So this was one answer why kalim are not valid. Another approach as the Gemara, but Caleb, the reason why it's not going to work is very similar to the case of the kuf. Is we're talking about when you give a sign, b'chivari b'sumki. He was wearing a white jacket. He was wearing a red shirt. Again, that's not a simon because many people have that type of clothing. Just like we said for the body, many people are tall and short. So the Gemara goes back again. You told me that by clothing, it's not a valid simon because we're concerned maybe he lent it. So the Gemara says, if you're talking about you have a problem with lending, and that's not a valid simon, I have the following question. Lahad Tanya, this we learned in a brisa regarding a shliach that's bringing a get, and he loses the get. Later point in time, matzah kosher b'kis, he finds the get tied on his pouch, oy ba'arniki, or in his purse, or b'tabas, on his ring. Or he finds it amongst his utensils in his house. Says the Mishnah, says the Brisa, but that even though a long time has gone by, which that's a chiddush as Rashi, because even though Mishnah Gittin Daf Chavzayin teaches if someone brings a get and it gets lost from him, if he finds it at a much later time, it's going to be puzzle. Here we're saying kosher, because he found it amongst his stuff. He found it connected to his purse, to his wallet, whatever. Says Zimar, wait a second, how does this work? If you're saying we're concerned for when people lend stuff regarding their kalim, so kimatsu kosher b'kis, when he finds the get tied to his pouch, am I kosher? Why does that make it kosher? Neches l'she'ela. We should be concerned, maybe he lent his pouch to someone else, and that other one tied that get that he was bringing for someone else, and this is a different get. So why would that make it valid? They said here also, no. This people would not lend either. Kiss, a pouch, and a purse, and a ring, people don't lend. Why not? So the Gemara explains. Kiss v'arniki, a pouch and a purse, because it's a bad omen. Because people say, oive, your mazel is with your pouch, your mazel is with your purse, and you don't want to lend that out to people. And v'tabas, your ring, mishum de mizayif, because every man used to have a seal recognizable on his ring, and when he sends something, he covers it and he seals it with his ring. So he would never lend his ring because this guy might make a seal just like his seal, and he's going to forge for his agency, and therefore people don't lend it out. So the truth is, it could be in general that maybe we are concerned for she'ela. It's only these cases that we're not concerned for she'ela, and again, therefore, even though that it's possible simanim adaraisa, that would not be by the case of a kalim shal mace. So again, we don't have a proof yet to say if simanim is daraisa or not. So the Gemara says, okay, you know what? Let me get tanoim. Let's say it's actually machlekes tanoim, if simonim is derais or not, because the Bryce says the following machlekes. Ema idin ala shuma. The Tanna Gemara says you cannot testify to allow a woman to get remarried to say, look, I saw the dead man, and he had a wart, he had an identifying feature, a birthmark that was on that organ. She says, exactly. He has on his left shoulder, he has a big birthmark. Says, no, Tanna Gemara says you cannot, that's not valid. But Lazar ben Ma'avoyam, he says, no, you could testify regarding a birthmark. So Gemara says, isn't this the machlekes? The Tanna Gemara says, Simon Rabban, the Tanna Gemara holds, Simon is only rabbinic halacha. For Ashes Ish, for a married woman, which is a deraisa, we cannot rely on a birthmark, on a wart. But Lazar ben Ma'avoyam, no, Simon deraisa is biblical, so you can allow a woman to get remarried. Isn't that the machlekes if Simon deraisa or not? So the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Amar Rabbi says, the Kul Alma, everyone holds Simonim deraisa. That's biblical. So it's biblical. Why would the one who holds it you cannot get remarried? There's a machlekes if someone was born at the same time with the same mazel, would he also have, you find certain people, they have very similar features. Would you say that this guy happens to have the same birthmark in the same place because he was born in the same mazel as this person? Maras Vatani Kama held, yeah, Shuma Mitzui ben Giloy. A birthmark is common. Someone born in the same zodiac, and therefore you cannot testify that this is the dead person. Marsavar, but the other opinion held that Shuma Inu Mitzui ben Giloy is not so common, and therefore it is a valid simon, and therefore you could get remarried. That's one approach. If you could say another approach. No, the Kulam according to everyone, Shuma Inu Mitzui ben Giloy. It's not common. The guy has a birthmark that's generally a valid sign. So that if everyone holds Simon deraisa, why can't she get remarried? For a different reason. They're disagreeing regarding, do we say that a birthmark changes colors, changes forms after, so if let's say when the person's alive, the shuma, the birthmark was black, when it becomes white, when it becomes dead, it becomes white, or let's say white and then turns black, that's their machlekes. A birthmark could change colors after the person dies, so it's not a valid identifying feature. But Elazar ben Mavai held so they don't usually change, and therefore it is a valid sign. That's a second approach. A third approach, you could say the kulam according to everyone no, it doesn't usually change, and everyone holds v'samanim d'Rabbanan. Wait, if it's Rabbanan, so why does the one opinion hold that you can get remarried? The machlekes is a birthmark such a clear, crystal clear simon. held So even if simon is rabbinic, you can rely on it to allow a woman to get remarried because it's such a clear proof. It's him. It's not a clear cut sign, and therefore it's not going to allow the woman to get remarried. So those are different approaches to say lav dafka it's machlekes hanoim if someone derives to rabbanon. Could be disagreeing about any one of the other principles. Now, based on this that we're saying, one of the answers we said that according to everyone the simon is rabbanon. So on that, Amar Rabbi continues and he says, if you hold the simon is not biblical, which we had entertained, and even now we just said that we could say maybe even everyone holds like that. So how do you return the lost object with simon? So what does that mean? Rashi explains. What did the Chum see fit to enter into a situation of doubt, to return money to someone that maybe it's not his? Because he gives a simon? That's not the biblical halacha. So why did the rabbis get involved and say, oh, okay, God gives a simon, give it back to him? Why? So the Gemara explains, because the guy who finds a lost object prefers that he should give it back to whoever brings simanim. So that when he loses something, they'll also give it back to him with simanim. So the Gemara doesn't like that. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? He says, you think a guy's going to do a favor for himself in money that's not his? In other words, why are you saying it that has to do with the preference of the guy who finds it? Oh, the guy who finds it, he'll give it back to the guy who brings him on them. If the guy who was lost from is not okay with it, what does it have to do with him? So Elrad the Gemara amends the teaching. You're right. Rava said, it's preferable for the guy who lost it that there should be such a law in the Jewish people, that you could give a simon and take it. And whoever comes and gives a simon can take it. What's the reason? So it says like this. Made the yada, the owner of the object knows the Adam Leslie. In other words, at times, the owner doesn't have witnesses to testify it's his. If you're going to require witnesses, he'll never get it back. So Meimer Amar, he says to himself, you know what, it's better for me that the guy who finds it gives it back to whoever says this among, because it's not common that people should be able to give someone besides me. Everyone else doesn't know clear identifying features of it. I'll give clear-cut signs and I'll take it. So he prefers, the owner prefers it. So the Gemara has interesting questions on this. So the Gemara, wait a second. What do you do in Mishnah on Daf Chaf that we had? The Mishnah said, he says, if let's say a guy finds 3 documents together, we said it depends. If it's echad aleiv mishloisha, if it's one borrower on all 3 documents from 3 lenders, we said yachz aleiv, you give it back to the borrower. We said shloisha shlav min echad, you have 3 that borrowed from one, yachz malva, you give it back to the lender without witnesses, just with the sign that he says that it was 3 and it was from 3 borrowers. The question is, you tell me because if it's 1 lender and 3 borrowers, you give it back to the lender. What happens if it happens to be that it fell from the borrower, who they already paid up? Are you telling me that nichele laleiva, that the borrower really is pleased with this takana ladurle lamalva to give it back to the lender, that the guy who found it will give it to whoever comes and gives this among them? As Rashi explains the question, he prefers if you leave it in the hand of whoever found it forever, because as long as it's over there and you don't give it back to the lender, it's like it's burnt. So he's not pleased, this borrower, to give it back with simonim, because it might happen that the lender will know simonim. So how are you saying that he's pleased? He's not pleased. He's never pleased. Don't give it back to anyone. I'm better off that way. So how could you say that over there? So Amalei said to him, now Hassam over there, that case of simonim, we don't care about what the borrower is okay with. That's svaruhu, that's logic, that if for sure did not fall from the borrower. Because these other documents of these other borrowers, what's it doing by him? When you have one guy borrows from 3, yes, they're going to give it back to the borrower because it definitely makes sense by the borrower. It's not common to be by the lender. The word is meloiva. Obviously, it fell from the loiva. And so to the other case, you have 3 that borrowed from 1. Yes, you're going to give it back to the lender because the gabi malva shchichi. It's common to be by the malva because they're all 3 and he's the lender on all 3. Not common by the leiva. So that's why we're going to give it back to each. Not because of preference, but that's because we know definitively that's who it is. One final question, says the Gemara, on the top of Chav Chesed and Aleph. I have a similar question. The Gemara is asking on Rava, if Simonim is their Rabbanon, you're saying the Takana is because the Baal Aved is pleased with this. Say, Allah did not. What are you doing in the Mishnah of Chav also that says, Matzah, if someone finds Tachar Shel Shtaros, a roll of documents, a good Shel Shtaros, a bundle of documents, or is a Yachzer? You're going to give it back because of a simon, whoever produces the simon. Now, if the lender gives it to him, you give it back to him. Now, if it fell from the borrower, I have the following question. You tell me the borrower is pleased with this takana, to give back to the lender with a simon, but he would be pleased if you leave it in whoever finds it. So because of this question, the Gemara actually retracts, Elam Rava, Simonim must be dairaisa. Because Rabbanan doesn't make sense in all cases, like with documents. The guy who really owns it is not pleased to give it back. Don't give it back to anyone. Keep it. Because I'm better off that way. Must be Simon's dairaisa. And actually it's a pasuk. It's a pasuk in Devarim. Oyim Chad can be with you until your brother seeks it. You think you give it back to him before he seeks it? Of course, you have to wait till he claims it. No, El Dershehu. You have to check him out. If he's a deceiver or not. Says the Gemara, Lab Simonim, isn't it by him producing Simonim? Says the Gemara, Shmamina, obviously it's the right. Now, the obvious question is that the Gemara already brought this. And the Gemara said, no, maybe it's with Eidim, not with Simonim, which actually, as we'll see on the next Daf, the Gemara in the Imtim to Leimer actually says that same point itself. But the Gemara seems to understand that no, that checking out a guy is not with Eidim. That wouldn't be checking him out. Checking him out is if he knows the Simonim, that would be how you check him out. And that's how we know the source of Simonim. Right? So I think it's any time those things.